Spots in Queens could lead to the closure of non-essential businesses and restaurants. Now, if Mayor de Blasio gets his way.
The state has agreed on the need to close public and non-public schools in the 9 highest risk zip codes. The state has agreed on the need to restrict activity in the 9 zip codes. We specifically proposed doing it by zip code starting Wednesday morning.
Okay, so Governor Cuomo already ordered all schools in these zip codes closed. City Councilman Donovan Richards represents Southeast Queens and Far Rockaway, where the numbers have been on the rise. He joins us this morning. Thank you so much for making time to speak with us today.
Good morning.
Good morning. Okay, so another zip code was added as an area of concern in Queens, Forest Hills, which is right in the middle of 2 hotspots. Do you believe a lockdown is the solution here?
Well, I want to start by saying prevention is certainly the best cure. The lockdown certainly should be necessary where we're seeing the spread specifically at. But let me just point out that targeting an entire zip code is not necessarily the answer as well. You know, we heard the mayor talk about closing small businesses across these zip codes who may not even be primarily the reason we're seeing the spread. So one of the things we're stressing to City Hall is that you really need to work with local communities, engage stakeholders in a real way, and really focus in on these census tracts where we are seeing the spread of the virus.
And when you zero in on these specific zip codes, right, because they're kind of broken up into tiers, tier A, tier 1 and tier 2, what exactly does that mean? And what makes these specific areas of Queens more vulnerable than another part of Queens?
Well, let's just start with when you look at places like Far Rockaway and we talk about the disparities that have historically existed in many of these communities where we saw the virus decimate our communities. We got to get at the root causes of why this virus is impacting communities like Far Rockaway, where there's a need for better health care and more access to fresh food and fruits, and to address many of the underlying issues. That's why you certainly have seen the spread in a lot more of these specific areas. But just getting back to the question, the answer to this problem is to make sure we are addressing the census tracts where we are seeing this spread. And I don't think that strategically the trace and tracking folks are even from the community. Let's start there. They're not from our local communities. They need to hire from local communities. We need to see local validators at the table working directly with the health department to ensure we can address and stomp out this virus every way we can. Otherwise, it's just like a sponge. You're squeezing on one end, but you're literally just spreading the virus into other zip codes, because if you won't shop in your local district, then you'll just go next door. So that's not the complete answer to resolving what we're trying to solve right now.
Right, but you say shutting down an entire zip code isn't the answer, but then yet you say you're squeezing one in and it goes to another zip code. So I'm trying to understand, how do you find a solution here then?
Well, zip codes are very big. I mean, you know, for instance, you have in the Rockaways, you have Edgemere, you have Bayswater, you have downtown Far Rockaway, and not every part of these zip codes are where we're seeing the increase. So the city needs to drill down with a laser focus on the specific areas in these zip codes to address the spike in the COVID cases. Yeah. But if you close, and I'm just saying this again, you can close every business in downtown Far Rockaway. I mean, who's to say people are not going to go down to Rockaway Beach? Who's to say they're not going to go down to parts of Long Island to shop and then spread the virus there? So if you're not addressing and working with community leaders in these specific census tracts where we are seeing the spread, you're just spinning your heels.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but if you look back to, say, the springtime, right, people would say, well, we didn't close things down fast enough. And the way things are going right now, the virus doesn't know a zip code, right? And it could just kind of, people who live in specific areas like you're talking about Far Rockaway, they could be traveling to Manhattan for work, be asymptomatic and not know it. So I think people are looking at this saying, well, what is exactly the solution besides zeroing in on these specific areas, right? Does there need to be more testing? Well, does there need to be more testing in these specific neighborhoods, and are you seeing that on the ground?
Yeah, so testing was certainly slow to get off the ground in communities like the Rockaways. So finally, you know, the mayor moved after a lot of advocacy. We have about 3 testing sites. So 3 things we're stressing to the community is you have to get tested. You can roam around our community and city and be asymptomatic. So we want to make sure that people are getting tested. We're stressing that. Last week, I personally got tested on live television to stress the importance of getting tested. We need people to social distance and to wear their masks. I don't know how else to say it. I mean, you have to adhere to the rules. So we also have a responsibility to our communities to make sure we're adhering to the rules and regulations. Now is not the time to be selfish. Stop being selfish. Healthcare workers, many members of our communities lost their lives. We had refrigerators outside of our local hospitals where bodies were being stored of people we know and love. And it's ridiculous that we're even having this conversation.
So let me ask you,
period.
let me just jump in here because, you know, we're talking about possibly shutting down zip codes and then zeroing in on specific areas. And I guess I want to get to what you're talking about with the mask. Should there, in order to keep this from spreading, right, just at the source, should there be heftier fines for people who don't wear masks? And should that be enforced?
Well, we should be taking, first of all, you know, enforcement has never been fair in our city. And I don't have to go back to our early days of social distancing and mask wearing and how the NYPD really targeted certain communities. So I think our job is to make sure that masks are in the hands of individuals. I think the NYPD certainly were taking the right steps in ensuring that now changing their policy and saying we'll hand out a mask before a fine. So we should at least take the steps and make sure that there are not enough masks in these specific zip codes and that there are a lot more community-driven solutions to making sure that this happens first. But yes, we have to hold those who fail to adhere to the rules accountable as well.
Yeah, there's not a one-size-fit-all approach. I think we know that, and that's what we've learned throughout this whole thing. Before we let you go, we only have a few seconds left. I want to get your reaction to the expulsion of Councilman Andy King. It is very rare that we see a councilman expelled from the city council. Your thoughts?
Listen, it was the right move. Anybody who retaliates and targets their staff members should be held accountable. I think the council laid out the report. The report spoke for itself, and accountability is the flavor of not just today, but tomorrow. Those who break the law, those who target their staffs and retaliate should be held accountable.
And for those who don't know,
the council was justified in voting the way.
Understood. Thank you. And for the viewers at home who don't know, there were many ethics violations against former Councilman Andy King. Thank you for your time, sir. I do appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Have a great day.